Changers.
Hi, I'm Chris Uglietta, and thanks for coming back for this next episode of Gamechangers powered by data.ai. In this episode, I'm excited to host Eric Seufert. Eric also lives in Austin, Texas, and he is a well-known mobile marketing entrepreneur, investor, and also the publisher of Mobile Dev Memo. I highly recommend going to mobiledevmemo.com, check out his podcast and his wealth of really excellent written content. In this episode, we review the promise and challenges around crypto gaming and the promise of Web3 and NFTs. Eric is very well versed in this space. However, he's not building a business around it. He's an investor. But that means he's had the opportunity to talk to a lot of companies and a lot of professionals in this space. So although he's very humble about his experience here, he really does a great job of answering some hard questions about what it looks like for this new space in gaming to be successful. So thanks for joining, and please hit me up if you'd like to be a part of the program or you have any feedback, and don't forget to follow. Thank you. Eric, thanks for joining. This is Gamechangers powered by data.ai. You may not know that we've recently rebranded from App Annie to data.ai, and that's to align with our vision to be the first unified data AI company, and that's combining consumer and market data to provide insights powered by artificial intelligence. So just want to make sure you understand, still the same people, but really want to make sure that our name reflects where our product is going. And on that front as well, we have sponsored the Alpine Formula One team. And myself, I'm a huge Formula One and car racing fan, so really excited about that. Eric, we're both in Austin. Have you made it out to the Formula One track yet?
No, I have not, and I'm grateful for that because my understanding is that basically every time they do an event, there's like a massive traffic buildup, and people have a hard time parking, and all the hotels are booked out. And has that been your experience, or no? Has it been smoother than what I've been told?
There's been some nightmare stories. It's been pretty smooth. How about this? I'll take you out there sometime, and I'll do it the right way. Circuit of the Americas is a great place to be for us Austinites, which strangely enough, it's pretty cold out here today.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, happy to go anytime.
Cool. And just a note as well, Eric and Mobile Dev Memo, as well as Data AI, are hosting a happy hour at South by Southwest, which is coming up here in March. The event is on March 16th at the Green J. And I'll put the link to the Eventbrite invite here in the podcast and YouTube video. So that's going to be fun.
Great.
It should be about, what do you think, 100 people there?
Let's pack it out, man. Let's do 200.
Yeah, open bar.
As far as I know, it'll be the only sort of mobile-oriented event at South by. I'm just making that up. Maybe there's more, but
yeah,
that's as far as I know. I haven't seen any others, so it should be fun. If you're in mobile, swing by. It's 2 to 6 p.m.
Yep. Yeah, we'll see what happens. In the past, mobile was definitely growing at South by. Rachel Ray did a big event. But we'll see where it goes. It's going to be a fun time, though, on the 16th. Check out the link. But today, we're here to talk about NFT and crypto gaming and really kind of peel the onion there. And I kind of want to start at the outer layers of the onion here and just give a primer. Eric, you're such a good explainer, and you're well written and spoken, and would love for you to just kind of give us the top line there on NFTs and what this is as it relates to crypto gaming.
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. I mean, I'm absolutely open about the fact that I am by no means an expert on cryptocurrencies, on Web3. I feel like I've done enough research to have an understanding of how it can apply to my work in gaming and advertising, but I don't have any sort of misconceptions about how much I know here. I'm sort of like I'm very well aware of the fact that I don't know everything. But I think given that the scope of this conversation is sort of Web3 gaming and the use of NFTs as a component of like a game economy, I feel reasonably well equipped to speak to that, right? So A good place to start is probably just what is an NFT, right? I'd imagine that anybody listening to this has heard the term NFT and
Hmm.
maybe are superficially aware of what it is, or very very sort of deeply aware of what it is. But an NFT stands for a non-fungible token, right? So this is a claim of ownership for some unique asset, and with that claim being represented as an entry on a blockchain, right? And the idea with an NFT and that sort of term non fungible, right? It's like fungibility means just like basically interchangeability, right? So US dollar is totally interchangeable with another US dollar. If you have one and I have one and we switch, we wouldn't know, whose is whose, right? I mean, they have serial numbers, but if we went to go spend those, a store would accept the one I gave you just as easily as they would have accepted the one that you gave me. And so what it means to be non-fungible, right? If the U.S. dollar is fungible with any other dollar, non-fungible, it means that they're not interchangeable, right? So it's some asset that's unique in some way, and it can't be just swapped with some other asset, right? So it's not a commodity, right? It's a sort of unique asset that exists independently of any other unique asset, even within that class, right? An interesting way to think about this, and a sort of common um, comparison is just like artwork, right? Like high end artwork, right?
Sure.
Well, like all these if you go and buy a Basquiat, well, that's different from any other Basquiat, right? Or you go buy a Picasso or something, that's different from any other Picasso, and that's different from any other high end piece of art, right? So just because they belong to the same class doesn't make them interchangeable, right? And they're sort of denominated in some other currency, right? In terms of implied price or valuation, I guess you could say. And then the other kind of like core concept to all of this, and again, not an expert, not the most outspoken on this. I haven't written the most about this. There are plenty of other people
Sure.
that you'll probably interview later that have, but would be play to earn, right? So if you think about, you hear about play to earn, and it's applied to, the concept of describing Web3 game, that you could take that sort of at face value and interpret it as meaning like, well, I'm playing this game to earn money, right? But I think, more sort of central to the idea than that, it as applied to gaming, right, is that when you play and you accumulate, when you play a play to earn game, right, and you accumulate some asset in that, some virtual asset in that game, that asset is tied to an entry on those assets are tied to an entry on the blockchain, right? And so those assets exist in a way that is independent of the sort of game environment, right? Now that doesn't necessarily mean they're not influenced by the game environment, or the game environment doesn't define some in-game use case for those assets, those virtual assets. But those virtual assets being tied to the blockchain, well, then they have sort of value independent of the game, right? So those become essentially like tradable assets, and that's what we've seen happen with a lot of play-to-earn games. They have these either the tokens that they issue or NFTs that they issue then become tradable on secondary markets outside of the game, and they take on value that in some cases is probably totally or like in large part untethered from the value in the game, right? They just become like commodities that are speculated upon. But the idea here is that when I play a game and I accumulate these virtual assets, I don't lose them if I leave the game, or I don't lose them if the game shuts down necessarily. I still own that thing, and that thing stays with me, and it's something that I could potentially sell and sort of like recover some value from, or I could trade, or I could hold on to, or I could potentially even bring with me to another game if those assets are like interoperable across gaming titles. So the idea is like these things that I accumulate in a game, they have sort of, I have a real world connection with the economics of those.
Got it. Yeah, and that brings up an interesting topic here. Is this about this new this new branch of gaming, or maybe this is the future of gaming? But is it about making money and sort of the value there, or is this about getting the player more involved with the economy itself and having a deeper engagement? I know that with Axie Infinity, there's a lot of players that are there simply for income. But how do you see this playing out?
Well, I think that um, first of all, it's a good question. I don't know that you can answer that question as relates to the category as a whole, right? I mean, it's going to be context dependent, and player dependent, right? And I think what's interesting about this as a concept is that it supports that use case where, hey, if I'm interested in just trying to make money, then that's a reason for playing. Like that's a potential reason for playing. Let's say, or that potential motivation for playing. But if I just really enjoy the game and there's this sort of like secondary benefit, which is that, these things that I've accumulated in this game environment actually have real world value, as denoted by, sort of entries on the blockchain. Well, then that just sort of like brings, that just sort of amplifies the value proposition. I like playing the game and I would have done that anyway. But as a result of playing the game, I have these assets that that have real world economic value to me. That's another interesting use case. And then there's then there's just a pure play speculation use case, which is like people just trade these assets without even playing the game at all, and you can do that too.
Right, and that's the world of pre-sales, which are so hot right now, of course. So this kind of feels like a digital cousin of Magic the Gathering, where you end up with the cards and you can hold them or sell them, but they do have some value and some scarcity.
Yeah, and or even just disconnecting from the sort of anchor of video games completely. There's parallels here with just like card trading, comic book collecting, fine artwork collecting. They're just a lot of people buy fine artwork and it sits in a free port. And they couldn't tell you anything. They're not art history majors. They couldn't tell you anything about who painted it or even like what style of artist they are or what style of art the painting is, but they're buying it to then sell it later. Right.
Yeah. Speculation. Sure. And it seems like we've seen this before with crypto kitties. I mean, what's different now? And, what have we learned?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I don't know that it's fundamentally different than what,
Okay.
than what was sort of unleashed onto the world with CryptoKitties. I think one of the let's say one of the innovations that happened since then was just development of new blockchains, right, that are more efficient and more scalable, right? I mean, that was one of the issues with CryptoKitties is built on Ethereum, and I think at one point it represented something like 70% of all Ethereum transactions.
Wow.
I wrote about this in a blog post recently, and I can't remember the number, but I have it up right now, and I'm trying to scan it while also
Sure.
seeming like I'm not doing that. But I
Yeah.
can't. I don't
Well,
see
I
it
imagine the
anyway.
overhead on that many transactions pretty costly, so it's not a very efficient model.
Right, exactly. 25% of the traffic on the Ethereum
Wow.
network. So yeah, I mean that was one of the big kind of killer apps, right, for Ethereum was CryptoKitties. I think aside from just Ethereum, the token. Um, but yeah, that's not a whole lot different. I mean, well, I guess what was different about CryptoKitties is that was just a pure play trading
Hmm.
proposition, right? Like you had CryptoKitties and you traded them. There was no sort of like underlying gameplay associated with that, right? Like the CryptoKitties themselves weren't part of like a game environment. It was mostly just a card trading proposition, and that's the same thing with like NBA Top Shot too, which is from the same developer. But now I think where we've seen this evolve is that there are companies that are building games where this idea, this concept of an NFT is integrated into the gameplay, right? So it's a useful. There's real utility. Let's say that I think in success there would be real utility of the NFT in the game, and there would also be some connection to real world value in terms, just as a function of this existing on the blockchain and me owning it, kind of independent of my engagement with the game.
Got it. And you mentioned there's a new layer here, where you don't have to go right onto the Ethereum chain, for example. And so there's new companies like Immutable and others like it. And what role do they play? And how do we see them as actors in the future here?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of companies that are exploring the space, right? So I'm an advisor to a company called Stardust, which builds a platform that helps game developers integrate NFTs into the game. And the thing is, like, you want, and I think the value of these types of platforms is that, what a sort of best case scenario for a Web3 game is if it's built by a team of veteran game designers who are more focused on the actual design of the game and hopefully
Hmm.
the design of the game economy, accommodating for all the complexities of crypto assets, and they're not crypto engineers, right? Now, at some point,
Right.
you probably have to recruit those people and have them as part of the team. But I think like the core focus of the company should be making a really fun game, right, that incorporates crypto assets natively and organically into the gameplay, and not a crypto team that's trying to build a game around a crypto project,
Just
right?
a hard
That
grind. Yeah.
well, it just doesn't work. It's almost impossible to make work. And building a good game is really really hard, right? I think people underestimate how hard it is, and so that's where I've seen a lot of these companies, the sort of like Web3 games fail. Is it's when the core founding team doesn't really have a background in gaming. They just think that gaming is an easy pathway to a big consumer audience, right? Which it is, but it's hard to do good games. It's hard to build good games, right? It's not a sort of easy path. It is a path to a big consumer audience, but it's not an easy path to take. It's a treacherous path, right?
Hmm. Oh, we certainly know that. And so will we see just more IP coming into the space, to sort of, capitalize on what's already there and then incorporate crypto NFT into it?
Yeah, I mean, so I think I just gaming in general sort of like thrives on IP integrations, right? And so Web3 gaming is no different. I think where you see kind of IP play like a sort of new or novel role with Web3 gaming is the ability to integrate that into the NFT assets, but then also the sort of necessity of it, right, for building awareness. Right, so one of the problems with Web3 gaming is that like the distribution mechanics are sort of like much harsher than for like for like mobile games, right? Mobile
Hmm.
games, you have a store, you have discovery mechanics that are built into the store. Those aren't super effective, but then you have a whole advertising ecosystem that's built around that is very efficient and effective at driving awareness with like systematic kind of user acquisition and performance advertising. And you don't really have those purpose-built discovery mechanics for Web3 yet, right? I mean, these Web3 games are not allowed um, in a robust way, let's say, and we can unpack that more in a second, but they're not allowed in a robust way on the mobile platforms. And so they're web apps, essentially. They live on the web or they live in, downloadable executable files. And so how do you drive adoption of that? It's a very different proposition than driving adoption of a mobile game, and that strategy and that sort of approach has been like well defined, right? Like the
Hmm.
App Store this is from 2008, right? So I think there's just a known playbook there, whereas the playbook for Web3 games is still very much being written. And I've done a lot of work at helping Web3 uh, games with like go to market strategy, and it's I don't want to say it's more difficult because mobile game distribution is difficult, and building an audience for a mobile game is difficult. But there aren't like the ready-made tools for it, and so you have to kind of like roll your own in a lot of ways, and build systems that are kind of constructed and stitched together with like duct tape and chewing gum.
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing that. I mean, a lot of the activities in Slack groups and Discord, which is, that's not mass. It's not scalable. I want to talk about interoperability. And one thing I love about new technology or these new terms, but obviously that means that if you buy an axe in one game, you could take it to another game, and it's going to have utility there. It's going to be worth something and be useful. Does that exist right now? I mean, what does it take to get there? It's hard to imagine the incentives that publishers will have to make that a reality. And finally, this is a many part question: is that will that become a vehicle for some sort of cross promotion for discoverability?
Yeah, I think. I mean, so I did a podcast a couple months ago with the Stardust team, and one of the points that the CEO raised, which was something I hadn't thought about, is like that promise of interoperability or the potential for interoperability becomes potentially like a user acquisition strategy, right? So like if there's like a big extant popular Web3 game, right? And you want to make your game appealing to the players of that game. Well, then you make the in-game assets of that game interoperable with your own, right? So then it's the value prop to the users is something like, hey, we're building this new game, new environment. Maybe it's more appealing to you personally than the one you're playing now, which is just sort of like, it's only reasonably relevant to your taste and interest, but what we're building is like very acutely relevant to your taste and interest. And so you can come play our game, and guess what? You can bring all of your in-game assets from that game with you, right? So you don't lose anything. You don't start over from scratch. Right now, we see that sort of strategy used in mobile. Historically, there have been, big category defining games, and then, they become very competitive, right? Especially if they're like sort of PvP games. And so you have a dynamic where, and it tends to always work out like this. It's just like the guilds or the groups or whatever kind of, atomic unit of team. Um, the ones that are there first tend to become the ones that are dominant, right? Because they just hoovered up a lot of resources, and they were just, there was like sort of insurmountable advantage that they had just as a result of like being a first adopter. And so people join the game and they can't compete, right? Because this team has been dominant for forever, and it's a kind of sort of
Right. That's
positive
not fun.
feedback loop. Right. And so what will happen is, a game company will just clone that game, and they'll reach out to like the tier 2 teams, like whether it's a guild or whatever, and they'll say, hey, look, you're never going to be competitive in that game. It's just impossible. But you can come to our game. You'll be first there, and you'll be our game's version of those teams that you can't compete with, right? So just come on over. We'll make it easy for you. We might even like kind of gift you some stuff, and we'll make it really attractive for you to come to our game. Well, you could imagine that same thing happening with Web3 gaming, except with that added sort of bonus of like, well, whatever assets you've accumulated, or whatever items you've accumulated in that sort of first game, you can bring with you to the second game.
And so is that a one-to-one relationship between the two games? Would they need to be from the same publisher, or who allows that to happen? Is that companies like Immutable and others?
Yeah, well, it's probably the second game, right? It's just a matter of making that, it's so the sort of the chain for the first game is established, right? You can see what's on it and who owns what. And
Hmm.
so it's just about making that, seamlessly integrated with the second game, is using the
Hmm.
same chain and allowing the NFT to be ported over. Or you don't even need to. It's just the NFTs are on record, right? So it's like, well, we recognize this as an asset in our game, right? Now the question becomes like, okay, well, like, you've got an axe in that game. And so, well, now you've got it. What are the sort of like fundamental, like, properties of that
Right.
thing, and how do they transfer over, right? Because like, let's say that the fundamental property of that axe has got like a chop speed of 7 and an attack damage of 9 or whatever. So, well, we can borrow those things, and that's sort of written to the blockchain. But what happens if like the scale of those things is just totally different in our game? So like,
Yeah.
actually, that was an awesome axe in the first game, but our scale goes to 1,000, and that game scale went to 100, right? Well, that's actually like a pretty weak tool, right? And then let's say that in the first game, like there's no metadata stored in the blockchain around appearance. Well, in our game, it looks like goofy. It just looks dumb and silly. And in the first game, it looks awesome, right? It looks really scary and intimidating. Like these are design choices that you can't really get around. You can't
Yeah.
define every aspect of the item in a blockchain entry, right? Um, and so that creates some problems. And then the other thing is like another sort of issue here, and it's not like, I think, necessarily call it like a deficiency in the model, but it's more just like a design challenge. Um, is like, well, all that, the ability to do that, the ability to like set the terms of how this thing fits into a broader economy, that power is concentrated in the game developer, right? They get to decide, and so that's just de facto centralization, right? Like, you haven't decentralized this because this NFT fits into a broader economy that belongs essentially or is governed by the game team. And so they can make changes that, dramatically devalue your NFT in terms of its utility in the game. Right now, on the secondary market, the value is just whatever the value is. If there's high demand for it, then there's high demand for it. Now, is that demand speculative? Like, well, I think people will bid more for this in the future than they are now. Or is it tied to the underlying utility in the game? Right? Because if you nerf a weapon, for instance, does the NFT lose value on
Well,
a
how
sort of
could it not?
USD
I mean, if
denominated?
it's tied to a crypto, to the ability to generate that, which is real money, how does it not get devalued. I think that's a challenge here. And how do publishers understand how to maintain their own economy in game?
Well, that is a challenge, right? That's a substantial challenge. Now here's how it might not. Now imagine that game is acquiring 10,000 new users a day, right? And there's only so many of there's that NFT is like one of a kind, or it's very rare, right? So there's a lot more people coming into the game, or they're ramping it up. There's a lot of people coming into the game. There's a fixed number of these things, and there's going to be higher demand on this thing, even if the game developer made it relatively weaker than what it was before, right? In terms of like its in-game sort of utility, right? Now there's more people coming into the game all the time, and so there's a higher amount of demand for these items. Even when this particular one got sort of decreased on a sort of like attack basis relative to some other stuff. So there's speculators that are saying, well, okay, I think there's going to be greater demand at all times. I want to buy this and hold it. And a lot of them are always trying to buy it from each other, so the price is going up, right? So that's been historically the problem with some of these big games. It's like the economy of the game, or let's say the secondary economy of these assets, right? These crypto assets is almost wholly driven by speculation and the sort of sentiment around which is entirely predicated on the sort of continuous entry of new people, either the sustained number of new people or a growing number of new people over time that'll drive increasing demand for these items. And if that doesn't happen, then the sort of value of these things just plummets on the secondary market.
Right. Or the stable value of the underlying cryptocurrency.
Right.
Well, we can continue about the economics and sort of makes publishers into monetary policymakers, and it's very interesting. But I want to go back and talk about the app stores, because this is really disruptive to the Apple, Google, model, Amazon model, and do you think they're going to allow this in Apple? Is it going to be this year, ever? Why, when?
Well, just to kind of close out that last point, because
sorry,
I think it's okay, but it's important, because I think that is fundamentally the challenge of operating these games at scale, right? It's managing the economies, right? And that's a challenge for pure play, just mobile games, right? Now, when you add on this, additional complexity of managing an economy that spans both the game's user base, the game's DAO base, and the secondary market, you create a lot of challenges for maintaining like stability and utility, and that is oftentimes the sort of dimension that these teams are missing. It's like someone to think through these economic challenges, right? And the results are disastrous when they just ignore that.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how Zynga and other big publishers handle this, since they are very accustomed to managing economies, particularly in genres like social casino.
Yeah, but onto the mobile platforms. I would say that this probably has not been super disruptive to them as yet, because they've just sort of refused to acknowledge this. Now there are like Animoca was doing something really interesting with his Crazy Kings franchise, and they're building out like a kind of bridge between the in-game experience, which is pure play mobile game, and Animoca is like basically all in on crypto now, and sort of this crypto economy. And so they created like a tournament in the game where there's sort of no perception or mention of these crypto assets in the game, but players can sort of like sign up for the tournaments outside of the game on the web to win crypto prizes, and they compete in the game, and that's just sort of the setting for the competition. But the sort of outcome of the competition affects the tournament, which is sort of like hosted entirely on the web. I think we'll start to see more of that. I think as a matter of App Store policy, now App Store policy is so inscrutable. I mean, who knows? I mean, and Apple keeps it that way because it makes it easier for them to sort of enforce what they want to enforce. But that I don't know that they would crack down on that, because I think there's probably nothing there that they find like hostile to their operating model. But I do think they will probably continue to prohibit like the kind of recognition of these crypto economies in the games, right? And it's obvious why they want to do that, because they want to control the economy of the App Store, right? And the App Store is driven by in-app purchases and subscriptions, and ads, which is sort of outside of their purview, in-game ads anyway. We'll see for how long. Maybe it won't be forever. But they want to control the sort of flow of money, and obviously take a commission or a platform fee when those transactions happen. And so the crypto, they can't do that, right? The crypto is connected to this whole system that is completely independent of the App Store and iTunes and all that infrastructure.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the drivers of this other sentiment out there, was this is kind of power back to the players away from the large operators like Apple and Facebook that crypto is enabling.
I just want to hang on that thought for a second, because it's what I'm seeing is really interesting. I think, given that I think like one of the fundamental promises and appeals of Web3 gaming is that on interoperability, the ownership of assets, and the ability to like utilize these assets in different games, different settings. What I'm seeing now is like this tendency for companies to just operate like pools of games, right? So like portfolios of games, almost like a publisher model, right? So they can accommodate for that interoperability, because there's a lot of design and planning that goes into allowing for that, right? It's not just something that, you pick any two random games, and you want to take your axe from the Viking game and bring it into the car racing game. Well, that makes zero sense, right? But
Right.
but I think you could construct a portfolio in such a way where that is very sensible, right? And maybe not every asset is interoperable, but some are. Like you create the space for some of these to have a role in any one of these games, because that you've thought through that sort of that sort of design imperative, right? And well, when you start to do that, well, then you start to centralize these things, right, in a way that is a little bit at odds with the kind of
Right.
the philosophy of crypto, right? So it is
Yeah.
interesting that my sense is like centralization is like kind of a core human behavior, right? Or not even that, but just a core sentient being behavior, right? Like the sort of the idea of like the lone wolf, like that's not really true. Like, and you don't really see that in the animal kingdom. You don't see that obviously in human society. That's never been the case. So I think like some degree of like there's a way to sort of bridge the sort of extremes where you've got like, well, total radical decentralization, which is probably just impractical and non-workable, but then like total centralization with just like one party, which also creates it creates sort of unnatural constraints on like progress and sort of like economic development and stuff, and the mobile platforms are a good example of that. There's probably some like happy place in between that allows for a lot of the promise and appeal of crypto without without sacrificing the benefits of centralization.
Yeah, so some pretty large technical issues to hurdle in the coming years here. So I want to go back a little bit to the growth model. As we said, there's a lot happening in Slack and Discord, and I know that player guilds are another way that new players can get ramped up and participate. How do you see crypto and NFT gaming evolving to the place that free to play is now, where you actually have user acquisition?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think there's probably an opportunity here. I think like when you go and you look at a lot of these, crypto ecosystem websites, they all have ads, right? If you want to go look at, there's like, I don't know, NFTtracker.com or, whatever, there's any number of these websites that they just scan blockchains and look at transactions, and they try to just, build a league table of whatever, of NFTs, of chains, or whatever. They all have ad units, right? Because people want to promote their stuff, right? Ads are great. Like ads support discovery, ads support personalization of content experiences and stuff. And so, it's natural that these companies would build ad units into their properties to allow people to bring awareness of their projects to a general audience, right? And so I think you'll only see that continue to evolve, right? Like it's hard to use like a general purpose ads platform like on the web, like some display network or like AdMob or something, to efficiently reach a crypto audience. Like the contextual nature of these existing crypto properties, is helpful, right? Because it just allows you to reach at the very least like a crypto audience versus just a broader generalized. Now you could do that with AdWords and stuff, Sorry, I said AdMob before I meant AdWords. You could do that with AdWords, and you could do that with display networks, but that's not very profitable for the site, right? You're going to get a lot more money going direct, right,
Mhm.
to the crypto project developers trying to reach a crypto audience than you are selling your inventory on AdWords, right, for people to bid against, right? And so, but that's not scalable, right? So
Right.
I think at some point you kind of stitch these properties together into a network, or like a portfolio of properties, and then you can build an ad network around that, that's designed to promote crypto projects. And I'm sure that's in the works. I'm sure people are building that now. Like whether that ad network runs on a blockchain or something, that's a different question. I've seen a couple of pitches for like crypto-based ads products, but none of them have been like super compelling. But I do think you start to see things moving in that direction, like where you've got these websites that attract a crypto audience that want to learn about these new projects, and you find ways to bundle the traffic together such that it's like meaningful to the advertisers, and then B, personalize the ads to people such that they're seeing the things that they might be interested in.
I love that opportunity. If anyone out there is working on this, please reach out. I'd love to talk to you. But I think you said something there, which is the crypto audience. And when is this? When is everyone going to be part of that audience? When is this going to be mainstream? I know that for example, just setting up the wallet. I was in an airport for 2 hours, and it took me the better part of that to figure it out. There's a lot of new phrases and everything that have to go in to set it up. Do you think that wall will crumble at some point?
Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate here, like I'm not by no means like a super crypto expert. I think I've just spent a lot of time thinking about the application of crypto to gaming economies specifically. So I feel
Yeah, and you've
reasonably.
spoken to a lot of the smartest people in the space.
Yeah, and I've invested in crypto projects, Web3 gaming projects. So I feel equipped to speak about this. But I'm not a crypto expert, and I'm not a
Right.
crypto cheerleader, right? I see fundamental problems in the ecosystem, and I think that's one of them. It's like I think people say like, well, look, this is going to hit mass market, mass awareness at some point. And I'm like, well, it's probably already there. I don't know that there are that many people that have like never heard of crypto, right? Like I remember 2 Christmases ago, I was at my wife's parents' house in Estonia, and my mother-in-law asked me if in Estonian, do you play with Bitcoin? Right. So like, I don't think this is a problem. Like we've reached everyone at least once with this idea. Like
Right.
it's not a
Yeah.
foreign concept to a lot of people. And so I think, yeah, that adoption curve is steep, but I think, that's a fixable problem. I mean, Coinbase brought in the NFT, trading platform, and like, MetaMask, I think has reduced a lot of the,
Yeah.
of that hurdle to adoption. And that'll just continue to get easier and easier over time. I mean, that's just a technology problem that can be solved. The deeper issue is, do people want to play games with an explicit, sort of end goal of making money? And that's an open question. I mean, some do, uh, right? But how many? And what the question I come back to a lot, as sort of like an investor in the space, is like, does Web3 gaming end up becoming a giant category with very many hit games, right? And then even more sort of like subscale, like commercially successful but not hit games, or does it become a category that's dominated by one hit game, right? And that only really has enough support for one hit game, right? Like once enough. So when I say enough support, I mean like enough interest from an audience. And like the example of the latter, the example of the former is free to play mobile games. There's lots of big
Hmm.
hits, and there's it looks like a pyramid. There's lots of big hits, and then there's like many like an order of magnitude more like sort of
Sure.
commercially successful but not big hit games, and then on and on. And then an example of the latter of a category that's just dominated by one hit game, and there's no real sort of consumer interest for more, is like AR gaming, and that's just Pokemon Go, right? That never blew up into like a giant category with lots of different hit games, like lots of different opportunities to play that way. And so I don't know. I mean, I think that's an unanswered question. I think, and as like an investor in the space, it's like, well, if it's the latter, you better pick the one, right? And if it's the former, then you got to place a lot of bets. And those are two different sort of like economic prospects from like a money manager's point of view.
And so, if it is the latter, do we see a game that has a billion DAU? I mean, is that on the horizon here? And that gets us really close to talking about the metaverse, but we won't go down that avenue today.
Well, maybe, yeah, maybe that's what that looks like, or maybe it's not a billion, but maybe it's a million DAU, but the economics are so insane for these games. Like the ARPU is so high for a lot of these games that, at a million DAU, which would be a big game, but not gigantic, um, that would be a very, very, very valuable company.
Oh, for sure. And just to wrap up, I know you said you had a few concerns about the ongoing the future here, or seeing this develop into mainstream. Is there anything else you'd like to add there that you see as hurdles?
Um, I feel like it's this is such a it's interesting because especially with gaming, I was around when free to play gaming was like by no means um, sort of like the success of it and the sort of like mass proliferation of it was a foregone conclusion. Like I remember when it was there was a big question mark. Like, is this a fad?
Hmm.
Oh, it's so scammy, right? And you hear those same protestations about Web3 gaming. Now, I'm always very careful to not try to sort of see something that happened in the past and then see something that looks like that kind of past sort of occurrence and assume that it's going to take the same trajectory, right? Like these two things could have looked the same in the infancy, but free to play games blew up and Web3 games just sort of peters out, right? There's no reason to expect that they'll both sort of achieve the same outcome and creating like big, exciting markets that consumers love. Consumers love free to play games. Like, why do they play them? They love the idea of playing like a AAA quality, high fidelity game and not having to pay for it, right? Or only having to pay for exactly what they want inside the game, right? But anyway, nonetheless, you heard the same criticisms, and I feel like with gaming specifically, I mean, the audience is so vocal, right? Like people are
Uh-huh.
so vocal, and the second you mention any of these companies mentions NFTs, like the big sort of legacy game developers mentions NFTs, they mention just tokens. They're met with like this sort of like army of resistance to that, and very vocal resistance, and I just feel like um, that's not probably representative of like you've got to play to the right audience. And so if you think about, free to play sits alongside console, with in pretty, harmoniously, right? Like free to play didn't displace console. Free to play didn't kill console. Console is more or less, stable, right? And so the crypto audience, and what I think about when I think about this is like the demographics of free to play look so radically different from console. And you heard, and the reason you heard the same protestations, uh, or those specific protestations about free to play, um, when free to play was sort of emergent, was because the console people, these games weren't being made for them, right? These games were being made for a totally different audience, right? And
Sure.
in a lot of cases, it was a sort of there was a sort of it was a gender differential. The console audience was very much skewed male, and the free to play games very much skewed female. Well, now what you see with Web3 relative to free to play, and especially the most successful Web3 games, it's not to say that all the future games will look like this or future successful games will look, but they're very much geared towards people in the developing world, right? And so and you're hearing this chorus of resistance from not only the console people now, but also some of the free to play gamers. Like, that's scammy. I don't get it. It's stupid. Why would anybody play this? Well, that's not designed for you, so you don't have to understand it, right? It's designed for a totally different audience. And so the question is, is that an interesting way to map these different categories? Like, console serves a very specific audience. Free to play serves a very large audience. That's not like that can't be broken down very cleanly across like demographic lines, but it's nonetheless sort of different. And then Web3, just the same, is potentially small, probably a smaller audience than free to play, but it's just a very different audience for free to play at the same time. And so these things can all exist in harmony. There's no reason that the existence of one threatens the existence of another.
For sure. I mean, there's a big difference between console and free to play, and then crypto, which is the mobile phone, the mobile device, and that being the enabling factor for the most of the world. And maybe the question here is, can crypto really compete and sort of pull in the free to play folks and become sort of a standard?
Well, it doesn't need to. As I think about free to play as being for people that have more money than time, right? The sort of the kind of core concept in free to play game design is like you have the option a lot of times to just sort of get exactly what you want when you want it, right? And with the benefit of money, right? I just pay for it. And crypto is kind of the opposite. It's like I've got more time than money, right? If I'm playing to earn, and that's not to say that there's not like a place for this, in the sort of just prime motivation of wanting to play and keep my stuff. But in the current sort of iteration of these games, it's like, well, people, yeah, they are playing to earn. That's the core motivation. And so
Okay.
they've got more time than money, and so they're happy to do that, right? And so like those are different audiences, completely different audiences, and you can reach those people on the phone too. There's no reason you can't do this through the browser.
Yeah. Got it. Yeah. So maybe eventually we'll see a game that's truly very fun, free to play style fun, and it sort of crosses the barrier there. But for now, it seems like two completely separate genres. Appreciate that. Well, Eric, I appreciate you joining me here on Game Changers. I look forward to our happy hour coming up South by Southwest on the March 16th, and have a great trip to Colorado tomorrow.
Yeah, cheers, and see you at the happy hour. See you at South by.
Yeah, and I'm going to drag you out to that racetrack. Maybe it'll be NASCAR coming up in March.
Oh man, oh okay. I got to keep my mustache then.
Yes, absolutely. I grew a mullet last year for it. It was a
Okay.
ton of fun.
I
Yeah.
bet. Yeah.
All right. Well, cheers. Thanks a lot.
Take care.
Bye bye.